Okay, after that very impressive presentation by Mike, I'm going to make this slightly easier, probably for mere mortals like myself anyway, to understand. And the topic is, as it says there, annotating Google Maps in Access. My name is Colin Riddington. I'm the owner of Mendip Data Systems, and I've got two websites. The current one, isleofdogs.co.uk, is where I have a large number of free example apps, access articles, code samples, and so on. And the Mendip Data Systems site, my older site, will be eventually updated and just used for commercial applications. And if I can just get the PowerPoint to progress to the next slide, that's it. Okay, so although I was talking about the URL limit earlier and web browser controls, I'm largely bypassing that issue in today's presentation by using static map images in Access, but I will mention the URL limit as it's relevant throughout. In order to get a static map in Access, you need the following things. You obviously need to tell it where it's actually going to be based on, and you can do that in one of three ways. You can enter a postcode or a postal code or a zip code, depending on the country you're in. Or if you happen to know them, you can enter the latitude and longitude values for the center of the map. Or you can enter a full or a partial address. For example, if it's a well-known tourist place such as the London Eye, that's all you need to do. But if it's a particular street address, you might need to put in something like 16 Hill Street, Weston-super-Mare, Somerset, England. Once you've actually told it where to actually base the map on, you also need to tell it how big the map should be in terms of its horizontal and vertical dimensions. Those are two typical sizes, but there are others possible, but there is a limit to how big it can be. You need to tell it the zoom value. The zoom can be anything between a value of 1, which covers the entire Earth, up to 20, which is rooftop level. In fact, you can go slightly above that, but not officially. Map type, you've got 4 choices. Road map, which is pretty obvious. Terrain, which shows hills and so on. Satellite, which is a photograph. And then a hybrid map, which is a combination of satellite photo with road map overlaid as a new layer. And lastly, but not least, you need to put in an API key that you get directly from Google. Now, it's free to obtain, and for most purposes, for small use or medium level use, it will be free in practice as well. There is a limit in terms of the number of Google Maps you can download each month. Last time I checked, it was something like 22,000 per month, static maps, slightly different figures for other sorts of maps. If you go above that, you will be charged. That's why they want your credit card key information at the beginning. But I've only ever been charged once, and I knew that was going to happen, and the amount I was charged was exactly as they actually had suggested it would be. So it's fine. You can predict and when you're going to be charged and avoid it by just delaying till the next month if necessary. And an example of the sort of map URL that you will be building up from this is the following. And this is the map that I've got with this URL. You start off with the base, if you like, base address there, base value, HTTPS maps, googleapis.com, maps API static map. That bit goes at the beginning of every URL you use, followed by a question mark. And then after that, I've put in there the center based on, this is the London Eye, SE1 7PB is its UK postcode. A zoom value of 15 is pretty good as a default level for most purposes. I've chosen a size of 640 horizontally, 480 vertically, and I've chosen a hybrid map type. So you've got the photograph, and it's overlaid with roads and indeed with certain notable tourist spots and other things like that. And at the end of that, you'll have a long string API key, and I'll show you some more details about that later on. But that's the basic map. What if you are wanting to present something more specialized for your clients? You may want to actually overlay that with some additional information, and that you do in terms of adding map layers. Now, that's what I'm calling annotating. It's not really the accurate word because that means adding a comment. What I'm doing is adding layers in different ways. And the idea of today's presentation is to try and show you ways of doing that, personalizing your maps for your clients. And I will include the following things within this presentation. Adding marker points. For example, on this map I've got here, I've got the center of the map marked with a red marker point here with the letter A put on that, and that's adjustable according to your preferences. You can add circles around a location, showing you the area that you're particularly interested in, and if you wish to, you can add the nearby places of a particular type within that radius. You can add boundary shapes. If you have the data, you can add the region, the boundary of the region you're talking about, for example, a postcode area, a county boundary, or whatever. You can add lines joining two or more points. They could be straight lines, they could be wavy lines, and most usefully, they could be a route between two locations. And finally, on some maps, roads don't show up very clearly, and if you want to, you can add colouring of your choice to show those more clearly. And on this particular map here, the more major roads are shown thicker, and the more minor back streets and so on are shown thinner. And that's just one style you can add. You're able to add labels. You can see these boxes here actually could be having a label added about what the road is. You can add other information such as parks, government buildings, and so on. But I'm not going to do that today. We'll stick to that only. And as I've already mentioned, all such annotations, as I'm calling them, are added as additional map layers using code as part of the URL used to generate that static map image. Or if you were using a web browser control, it would be the URL placed in that. And as you add each of these things, the URL will get longer. Now, what I've got here then is that same starting point. I've replaced the postcode here with the latitude and longitude, put in a zoom value, different size value this time, map type, road map this time, and I've added a blue marker, normal size with the label X, and I've told it to be centered on the particular postcode, which is the same as I've got here. And then you put your API key at the end of that. Move on. And I'm going to start off with 3 free example apps that you can download from my Isle of Dogs website, which shows some of these features before going on to a more complex example where I'll explain how it's done. First one then is get geolocation from photos. These days, mobile phones and digital cameras almost always will include EXIF information, so you can actually say where the photograph was taken, the camera it was taken on, and so on. And if I just go to this here, I can just give you a quick example of that. And it's on the other screen, just drag it across. So on here then, we've got a thing to select a photo. I'll drag that onto this screen as well. Take a photo of a llama. And as I did that, then it instantly loaded the map where that photograph was taken. So the photograph EXIF information, and there's an awful lot more of it here, of the time it was taken, the latitude, longitude, the altitude, and even the camera direction. So it was pointing in about 198 degrees, which is actually in this direction here. I put a marker on the center of the app there, X to show the center of it, and I'll put the latitude and longitude figures here, and even using another Google API, reverse geolocation, I've got the address of the nearest house to the point I took the map there. I can do things like zoom the map, and when I do that, it's getting larger now, getting larger still. I can shift it slightly to one side. I'll bring it back to the center there. I can bring the level down again, and so on. And I can also, this is a hybrid map, I can change that to road map. You can see what I mean about the roads don't really show up very clearly because they're white on a fairly pale background. Terrain map, not particularly interesting here because it's largely flat, but a little bit of hill there, satellite, and so on. And the URL that I've done for this, I haven't shown it on here, but the URL could then be used to load a full screen dynamic map in a web browser. And again, I would have to actually make sure that I fitted in within the limit of characters allowed. Let's show a different photo. This is my dog, or one of my dogs, called Isla, hence the Isle of Dogs username that I use a lot. And we took that photograph in the middle of those woods on one of her walks. Just again, we've got a different address here, and we'll take one more photograph here, this one at random here, and this, let's rotate that round. This is a pond under construction, and you can see it's taken again in a fairly remote area. So you can put any of your photos into this free app, and you will then be able to get the information from that. Let's come out of that. Let's go to the next one. You could also get your current location. Now, this could be useful if you were lost and you just happen to have a tablet on you with my Access app downloaded and a brilliant internet connection. Maybe that's not going to happen if you're in the middle of nowhere, but let's show you how it works. Now, with this, I've had several different versions of this, and the one that gave the greatest accuracy used the Google JavaScript API. Unfortunately, JavaScript API no longer supports Internet Explorer, which means I can't use that anymore. And it was the first casualty that I've noticed anyway of the phasing out of Internet Explorer. It might still be supported by Microsoft in Access, but it's not supported by everybody else. But if I click on this, I can get the geolocation from a different method. And in this case, I'm using mobile cell towers and Wi-Fi nodes. And if we go in here, within an accuracy of about 1.5 kilometers, it says, but actually it's a lot closer than that. It shows you where I am, definitely in the middle of nowhere. Again, let's come out of that. And you could just enter your locations in there as well by typing in the coordinates. Let's go to the next one. And the third free app that's also available on my website then allows you to look up all the addresses for a particular postcode, and you could adapt this for other countries. Now, I'm not going to show you that one because my commercial app that I'm going to show you here and use for the rest of this presentation does that and a lot more. And this commercial app can be found there. And if I click on this now, and hopefully it will open. And it opens this screen here with a menu of choices here, and a default postcode is used to create two maps at the beginning. And I've used the London Eye again because there's a lot of things and people have heard of that there, a road map and a satellite photo at the same time. Now, one of the things built into this, which may or may not interest people, is that I can actually update that every 5 seconds with a new map, road map and satellite photos. Some will be in the middle of a town, as you can see there. That's Ipswich in East Anglia, Glasgow on the outskirts by the look of it. Next one here, and I'm going to pause it, hopefully, Norwich here. Now, if I click on use this postcode and click on that, it's going to ask me if I want to get the postal addresses for that selected postcode there. Somewhere in Norwich, as far as I know, I've never seen it before, so I think it's going to tell me that I've not actually downloaded any yet. It has. So do I want to download the addresses now? Yes, I do. It loads the form, and not particularly useful one there. There's just one place on that. Holt in Norfolk. There's the full address there. I'm going to come out of that one. I'm going to start the update again. And try and do one more. I won't choose that one. Try and get one with a few more addresses on it. Because this is random, I've got no means of knowing what I'm going to get. There's a few more there, one street here. If there's anyone UK based that would actually like to put the microphone on for a second, because I can't see the chat, and tell me a postcode to enter, I could try and enter one here. Any suggestions?
CR20BJ, that's Charlie Romeo 2 0.
What's after the 0?
0 Beta Juliet.
Correct.
Okay.
There we go. South Croydon. I think I know where that is in terms of where you live, Adrian. So you're somewhere on that road, and here's a map for where you live. And again, we can increase that. And again, we've got the marker on there. So I can put in any address at all. I can do an awful lot more from here, load all of these options, and I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to now move from that onto an example form which shows you how the map is built up. Now, as I said earlier on, there's certain things you have to put in, and then there's certain things you can choose to add on as well. So let's start with the things you have to put in, the map center. Now, there's 2.6 million postcodes in the UK, of which nearly 2 million are in active use. I'm obviously not going to put a combo box with all those in, so I've actually selected 10 at random. And let's move out from the London Eye. Let's go to Bristol. BS78HP, which is an old address of mine. I'll put in a zoom value of 15, which is a good starting point usually. I've got 3 choices here, although I could select others. Just choose the middle one here, and I'll start off with roadmap. And when I've done all of those, it's telling me I've got all the information I need. I could add up to other optional items at this point, but I won't yet. I'll add an API key. And before we go any further, can I just stress that this API key is an old one. It's not in active use anymore. It's not the one I'm actually using to generate these maps. But now this has been enabled. Let's generate that. And it's actually loaded the map for that particular point there. I can at this stage. Oops, didn't change it. I could change that to a larger scale. Satellite. I need to generate. I'd normally do this automatically, but for the purposes of today, I'm actually doing it by pressing the button each time here. Change the size. I could go all the way back down to the whole Earth. And I can go up to the theoretical maximum of 20. But in fact, I found out by just typing in the wrong number that you can actually magnify it a bit more. You can get to 22. Whether you get any more detail or if it just goes blurred, I'm not really sure. But I'm going to go back to 15 at this point here. And you can see here the URL that I've been building up as I was doing that. And I meant to do that step by step. So I'm just going to clear that lot. And I'll stick to Bristol. And as I put it, oops, sorry, it's actually not cleared it completely. Try again. No, it's not clearing it. All right, I'll explain it step by step then. And I'll put in what may or may not be the same. It will update automatically if I've changed anything here. I'll take in hybrid here. Right, so what we've got then is the base URL for static maps. As I mentioned before there, maps, googleapis.com maps API static map. You get that from the developer's guide from Google, and I'll give you the link later. After the question mark, you put in the center of the map. I'm using the coordinates here, though I could use postcode or address if I knew it. The zoom value, the size of the map type, and my supposed API key, although it's not the real one I'm using here. And as you saw there, right, that actually has built up the thing ready to generate the map. But it seems that I've actually managed to confuse it, so that's working now. Right, so that's a map I had before. Let's add a marker for the center. And I've got some default values in there, a red marker, label X, and normal size. And that's place it right in the center of the map there. If I zoom the map, obviously it will stay in the center. I've got no nudge facility on this that I showed you in the previous one, but I have in my real app here. So we've got that. You can type in standard red, blue, green codes here, 00, FF, FF, or whatever, or you can just use the default colors here. Change the label. I've just put in a sample here. The only restriction is it can be a number or a letter, alphanumeric, but it must be 1 character only. And you've got 4 choices of size. Normal is the largest. You can go down to mid, slightly smaller, and it's updating the URL as I do so. 215 characters at the moment, no problem in terms of length, and you see a slightly smaller one here. If I change that to tiny or small, it's too small to display the label, so you just get a marker, and tiny is really tiny. You may not even be able to see it, it's just there. Let's change that back to normal, and we'll change it back to 1 this time, and you can see it's updating automatically. No, it didn't change it from tiny, normal. So it's very easy to mark the center of the map, and you can therefore point out where you happen to be. What would be really nice is if it could point to a particular place and you could annotate it by adding text there showing what the address is. If that's possible to do, I've not yet managed to find a way of doing it. If anyone does know how to do it, I'll be very pleased to find out. Let's add some lines. Now you can, as I said, add straight lines or wavy lines depending on the number of points you include. We'll start off with a vertical line, color red, of weight or thickness 3, straight through the center there, as you'd expect. Let's change that to horizontal. Let's change the color, same as before, same range of allowed colors there. Let's make it thicker, and you can hardly see that in purple. Let's change the color again, brown this time. Notice that the number of characters used in the URL has increased because I've actually got some points here that are used for the line. And I've got the coordinates then of these points here. And I'm only, because it's a straight line, I'm only using 3 points here. The first point, the second point, which is a little bit further up, and the third point there, which is a little bit further up still. If I change it so I've got both horizontal and vertical, the number of characters will increase. And if we change the color back to red, which was a bit, or orange will do, which is a bit more visible here, and you can actually see then the point on there. We've got some more choices. You could have whatever you like. Let's add a diagonal line, which you might find useful. You could have it that way if you preferred, or you could have a cross in a diagonal direction. And the next one, I can't think of any real practical use for having a zigzag on a map other than to show you what it's going to do to the URL, because instead of having only 3 points, I've got to have a point for each part of the zigzag. So that's increased significantly to 636 characters. Generate the map, much too big to see that that is actually a zigzag. So let's bring that down to 14 and bring it down a bit further still. And you can see there the effect that's had on that. So a zigzag can be done, but that could equally be a wavy line, or it could actually be following particular roads and so on. It doesn't have to be just a line though, or a zigzag line or whatever. You can actually make it an enclosed shape based on a number of lines. For example, a rectangle. And the rectangle, let's go back to red for the color here, if I can find it. And now I've got a rectangle based on there. You can also choose the fill color. I actually not included this in here, but you could change that to any color you want to as well. And we've increased that so it's largely full size. Now, having got a rectangle, which is just 4 sets of lines, obviously each of these lines has to be defined by a starting point and an end point, as well as the fill color, which is shown here. And in fact, if I change that to, with a bit of luck, that will update the color. There you go. I've just changed the fill color. So let's change it now to an octagon. And the octagon, I couldn't get the coordinates quite right to make it a regular octagon, so I know it's more stretched horizontally than vertically. But again, the number of points has increased again, as you can see here. And I could, if I wanted to, have other things as well. But let's move on from that, because obviously it's not a far stretch from that to go to a circle. Instead of having 8 things like that, you could have a whole series of short lines going round the shape of a circle. But you can imagine how many points you would need to include on that to make it look like a circle. The URL is going to get very long indeed. And if you were loading this in a web browser control rather than downloading a static map each time, then you would soon hit the limit. And the limit, according to Microsoft, is 2083 characters. Where that figure comes from is hard to understand. I think it's 2048 plus a few to handle the actual working of the loading of the web page. And that was what it was in the default browser that you get with Microsoft Access, indeed with Office there. That's based on version 7, which must be at least 15 years ago, but it's still what you get by default. You can change that. There's a registry key that you can change called feature browser emulation, and you can change it to 8, 9, 10, 11, or even edge mode, but that's effectively the same as 11 for these purposes. And when you get to IE 9 onwards, that just about doubles that figure to 5165. And I've not seen any official documentation for that, but I've tested it, and it does seem to be what the limit is in a web browser control. So I'm now going to load instead a circle. I'm going to try to. I'll leave the marker on there for the center. I'm just going to untick that again for a second. So we've got that map there. Let's go to road map at this point. Right, so we've now generated a circle. Now that circle actually is made up of 36 short straight lines. If you've got very good eyesight, you may be able to see distinct corners there on some of it, but from all intents and purposes, at this level anyway, it looks like a nice neat circle. That's what I've got here. To deal with the problems of additional each section on here, instead of putting the coordinates in, I've got a set of encoded represent the same thing, and I'll show you later on how that's done. And there is some code from Google that I translated into the VBA to do this, but each one of these will represent a particular position on here. And I've chosen lines at 10 degrees intervals around there to actually get this here. So if I change the zoom, but leaving the circle on, it will. And it's getting a bit slow here. Okay, and you see, and so on, how it will change here. If we put a line back in fact, let's change it not to the octagon, but to have the horizontal and vertical, I can have a bullseye effect. And if we go back to here, we've just got the circle at the moment, and my computer is slowing down, it seems, for some reason, so apologies for the slight delay. Yeah.
Colin, do you hear me? We have a problem screen.
I can.
Can you hear me? Please turn off.
I can, Carl. Yeah. What's the problem?
Yeah, please turn off your camera. There seems to be a connection problem, and the picture is frozen.
Right. Okay. If it freezes again, tell me, and I'll stop sharing and come back in again. Right. Yeah, sorry about that. Right. I hope you didn't lose too much there, but I went through adding markers. Okay. So I showed you lines. I showed you markers. I showed you circles. And if we just take off the line here and take off the marker, you've just now will, when I do this again, have a circle, and I'm going to go to road map, and I'm just going to increase the size of it by 1. So I should have a road map of Aberdeen, which is up in Scotland, road map in the background there, a circle there with a green fill. So where might you want to use this? Well, Google has a nice nearby places feature. And by putting a circle on here, I can now, by clicking this tick here, load another API, and it will load all the places of a specified type within that radius around my center point here. Now, you can define it more precisely, but in this particular example, I'm just using all types here. And let's take one of these. If I double click on that, it's marker B on there, it will load another form very slowly here, and you can see the same map as before, and you can see it seems to be a hotel when it's open, and even the reviews on Google for that particular place. Let's close that one. Different one here, more modern place in Aberdeen there, but it's the same idea, all the same points as before. You can also click on the map. Now, I'd love it if it were possible, this mouse move bit on here, I'd love it if I could click on this map here. I know I'm not using a web browser, and then load a particular place. So I'd love it if I could load, let's say, point F, whatever F is. F is another hotel. Let's take something different, a cinema, Q, if I could find it, which I can't. There it is. I'd love it if I could click on Q and get that form there, but I can't. So what I can do then is just do this, and you get the same idea, and I can scroll through different images that it loads on there. And this is all stuff that you can download from Google with the different nearby places URI. And the only difference here is that it's changed the beginning of the URL. And it's changed that to Google Maps API's Maps API place nearby search. And then notice at the end of that, JSON. Now, I'll come back to the JSON in a second because I'll show you the code for that. But let's just come out of this a second and go to nearby place search, and I'll load it for the default postcode here. Google provides you with something like 100 different place types. We'll start off with the all types one as I did before. Start off with the default radius of 500. I won't put in a keyword, but you can filter if you wanted to. Search the nearby places, and it's a better laid out version of this, which is just limited to this particular thing, Odeon Cinema, and you can see the idea there. But oops, don't know what that was there. Right, so say I'm near the London Eye, and I'm now wanting to go find a bank or a cash machine. Then it will tell me there's actually, surprisingly, only one within 500 meters. And I could change the range, and I would imagine that I'm going to find more within that range there. And as you see, I can find quite a lot there. And I could click on any of those. I don't think there'd be a picture for an ATM. So having got my money, why did I want to do that? Because having spent all day touristing around London, I want to get a drink. So I need to find a bar. And it's given me a place, a whole series of different bars where I can go and get myself a beer and perhaps something to eat. And after I've done that, then I've drunk so much, I can't drive anymore. So I'm going to find a bus stop. And it will show me where all the bus stops are in that area. And having done that, then I might actually realize that I bit off something more than I could chew earlier, so I need a dentist, and so on. And you get the idea that you can select anything you want from here. And I would imagine that there isn't a cemetery anywhere near the London Eye, and as you can see, there wasn't there. Okay, let's come back to my example forms and just check. Hopefully it's still live and showing. At the moment, obviously a blank form here. And I can load other postcodes from here. Let's load this one, which is, I can't even remember where it is. Put in a default value here, put in a size, put in a map type. I'll stick to road map for now. And I've gone through the marker, the line, the circle. Haven't shown you any code yet, but I will do shortly. And I'm going to move on to boundary. Now, you won't get the boundary information from Google. You have to have that data separately. But the boundary here is going to create a much longer character length on my URL, 1165 characters for an area boundary here. And even though I'm encoding it, right, it's a longer value. If I wasn't encoding it, if I was putting in coordinates, it would be many thousands. It would go beyond the limit. Let's generate the map. And it seems it hasn't actually done the boundary for some reason, and it's probably the scale I'm at. Yes, I'm on a very, very large scale. Change it down, and you can now see the boundary. This is a large postcode area in the middle of Wales. It covers a huge area there, which is why I needed a lower scale there. I could put lines and circles on top, but I won't do. That's the postcode area LD, the first two letters, which is actually a place called Llandudrod Wells. I apologise for my Welsh accent. I can go down to the district level, it loads the boundary area data, sorry for that, and it's a slightly different postcode limit, URL character limit there, and it's going to be a smaller area, so it's going to reduce the size of that, and I can increase the zoom of that to a larger value. Slightly too big, and so on. And I can go one level further down to sector level, and those of you in the UK should understand what I'm doing here, and that's now LD15. And if I generate the map for that, it's a much smaller area, and I've got, for some reason, an error there, which I'll ignore. Okay, so I've shown you boundaries as well. I'll show you the data for that, I think, at this stage. And for this then, postcode area boundaries. For each of the 125 odd postcodes in the UK, postcode areas in the UK, I've obtained the data for the coordinates that denote the boundary. Don't worry about what the type is. If I expand that, you can see it's actually a very long string there. And by encoding it, you can see how much shorter that actually is. And how much it shortens it by will depend on the particular postcode you've got, whether or not it's got several discrete areas, as some of them will have. If I go to a query here, postcode area boundary length, some postcodes have got separate discrete areas. For example, if they've got islands as part of the postcode area. And if I load this, then you can see then that the total length of coordinates for the largest one, I've got it in descending order here, is 5,000 just for the coordinates. By encoding it, I reduce it to a quarter or even less. If I go instead to the district boundaries, and if I put that in descending order, you can see then that you're talking about 40,000 characters before encoding, 1,400 afterwards. You can see why ideally you would actually want to have longer character limit if you were doing this with dynamic maps. And for sector boundaries, you've got a similar idea as well. And it seems to be slowing down. I've actually chosen that I have got them in descending. No, I haven't. Let's put them in descending order again. that actually was the largest one at the beginning there. And in fact, even if there were 64,000 characters, I wouldn't be able to do this sector boundary for these particular largest ones here, even with the newer web browser controls. So I would still need to actually use an encoded path here to reduce it down. But by doing so, I may still end up by being beyond the limit at the moment. So therefore, what I'm doing is not only encoding it, I'm sampling the data as well. So I don't take all of the points, I take just some of those. And if I just come out of those and go back to my form, and if I show you them with a different postcode area here, this is the Hebrides, which is islands off the west of Scotland there. And at the moment, I've just got a central marker. And I've got an error. While I'm just closing that and starting again, Karl, can I just check, was that still responding, or had that stopped again?
Everything responding, I think.
Right, okay, thank you.
Looks good.
Right. Okay, so I'm zooming back here, 20 to 8 at the moment, so I've got about another 10 minutes or so. I'm nearly finished on this form anyway here. Roadmap will do fine. And if I add the API key, haven't added any boundaries at the moment. And it's a very large scale. It doesn't really tell you anything at the moment. That's where I am there. I'm not going to try and pronounce that. Let's just reduce the scale down to 7 and add the area boundary. And you can see what I mean about approximations here. It actually covers all of the Outer Hebrides, which are the islands of Lewis, Harris, and Benbecula. And realistically, really, that would closely follow the boundaries of the island. And by sampling the data to make the characters fit in within the limit, I've actually had to do some approximations there. If I go to district level, and I can just increase the zoom slightly, you see the effects again. And if I go to sector level, and again, I've got an error has occurred, and this one is there is no built up area. That's why I should have put in a bit of code to deal with that, and I forgot to do so. So you get the idea of all these things here. Let's come out of that, and let's show you one more. And let's just increase the scale of this. We're in the middle of nowhere. If in doubt, close and reopen it. We're in the middle of nowhere, so I'm not going to get too many roads. Oops, that one. Let's choose a different one. Still not going to be many roads. Again, it is part of Scotland. Add the API key. And the few roads there are in there, you probably can't see very clearly. So let's add one of the possible styles you can do. Now, any roads will be coloured in red, which makes them definitely a lot clearer. If we change that to London, you can see that more effectively there. Right, I can take off the style. Map. The roads are visible, but not as clear. Put it back on again. I'll leave it in red for now. Generate the map again and change the zoom and bring this down. And you can see then that you can actually show maps showing different places in the country there. And each of these boxes I could use to add the label for the major routes, but I'm not going to do that now. Now, I think having covered all of this, unless there's any particular questions before I leave this form, I'm going to show you some, not all, some of the code. Is there anyone who wants to ask anything before I move away from this form?
There were some questions, some related to the form, some related to other things. Do you have a few minutes for the questions, or will you take it at the end?
Let's take it at the end. All right, having asked
Okay.
the question, I'll take it at the end, right? Because I'm aware of the fact we're at 7:45 now.
Sure.
Right, so if view code, drag the VBE across here. This is the code for this form here. As I update the URLs by doing any of these different things here, what I'm doing then is I'm updating the circle. For example, I update that, and in this particular case, it will delete anything from the existing map circle there. Then it will build up a string value there, which I'm going to use to then update the URL. And if we go to the update the URL, that is built up with the base bit, the very start of the URL here, the Google Maps part, followed by a question mark, followed by comments for the location, the zoom value, the size, etc., etc., etc. And then after that, it will add normally the real API key from Google there. And it does some other things, checking after that what should actually be enabled and what should be disabled. But having done all of that, the next thing I need to do is then I need to create the map. So I get the map image, I'm downloading a static map, I check I'm connected to the internet, I then am going to download the map to a file called map.png in the current project folder, and then I'm going to get the URL from what I did before, and I'm actually going to replace the dummy API key in this case with the real one. You wouldn't need to do that in your own map there. I then use an API call download file from web here. I'm not going to go through the details of that, but that's based on this API here, URL download to file, and actually there's some code there that's out of date. I need to update. And if we go back to the form I was on, having downloaded that, then it just places that in that image there. And you can see, just to make it clear, every one of these changes I made downloads a new map based on that URL. None of this data, apart from the encoding information, which I will save beforehand, none of this is saved. It's downloaded a fresh map, fresh URL each time, and it happens in a split second. If I'm doing nearby places, then I have a slightly different bit of code, and for that, I'm importing the nearby places from the Google database. I'm using a different API, passing my key there, still free. I'm then giving it the information where I'm going to be based, how large the radius needs to be. And then after that, it downloads the JSON file from Google. So I'm setting up information. This is basically one of the things I did with my JSON app that I briefly demonstrated last year. And it then builds up the information, it checks whether there is any nearby places for that type, then it cleans up the JSON file to actually get rid of some problematic characters that might cause problems, such as single quotes or whatever within the VBA. Having done all that, it then loads all them into a file, into a table there. And you can see we've got various different things again to clean it up. And if I just go to the nearby places table nearby places, and I've hidden it, which wasn't very bright of me. And I haven't got any because I've cleared it earlier, so let's just put this in very quickly. We're in SE17PB, do that, got the nearby places, and now you can see that it's actually loaded a long unique identifier here, the postcode, when I did it, how large the radius is, the markers which I've added myself in my code, what the place is called, where it is, where roughly the address is, the distance from the center. Some of these things are within Google, the things like the photo reference and so on, etc. So I'm using information that's there and adapting it for my own purposes. So I think I have covered nearly everything. There's just a couple more things I want to do very quickly before the end, and that is mention that for the circle, to populate the map with the circle data, then I'm doing a number of different things here, and with this I'm actually loading some code called gmap circle, and the gmap circle thing will load a series of straight lines. I didn't show this clearly, but I didn't magnify it here, but you can actually then see that it then loads a series of straight lines using trigonometric functions, some of which are built into Access, but some of which were missing that I needed, such as arctan2 and so on. And to do that, then I've got a series of extra ones: arcsine, arccos, arccotangent, arcsecant, I can't even remember what all of these are, and arctangent2, all of which are useful in different places, and some of which are used here. And very lastly on this, before I come out of the app and go to the PowerPoint, just to finish off, then if we go to mod geocoding here, no, wrong one, mod mapping, sorry. There's a GMap circle again. I've got to left this open. Now to get this to do the encoding, then encoding the polyline, you can find this with a bit of effort on Google. All right, it then provides you with the information you need to actually do this. I had to convert it into VBA, and there's a series of different points. You start off with your coordinates. You then multiply it by 10,000, change it to binary, left shift it by 1 bit. I have no idea why it works though. You then check whether it's negative or positive, reverse the characters, the zeros and ones, series of steps that aren't actually needed, don't know why they're there, and at the end of that you convert it to its ASCII equivalent. And if I just do this for one particular value here, a coordinate there you go, it's done the encoding. And if I change that to something else and run that again, we get a different value. So it can do that for both straight lines and for curves and circles and so on. So I'll come out of that. I'll close the app, go back to my PowerPoint, which is still there. So as I said, this is a commercial app, but there are free versions that have some of these features. I'm just finishing off then, useful links. If you want to do this yourself, obviously you're welcome to buy my app. But that's not the main purpose of this session. Useful links. There's a number of very, very good developers guides for the Google Map APIs. The start one, the static map API, which covers nearly everything except for the styles, the road styles and so on. For nearby places, there's a different API. And obviously you will need to make sure that you have, with your API key, enabled all of the API types that you need. Reverse geocoding being another one I use, and it used to be the JavaScript one. Just finishing off here. Information, if you're using a web browser control about the character limit, officially still 2083, but various bits of code, various places I've found suggest 5165. And lastly, you will want to make sure that you use the latest version, the web browser control. So I've got a link on my website here, an article which tells you how to change the feature browser emulation. And my very last thing before I stop is to plug the Access user group, which is a new chapter of accessusergroups.org. We've had 2 meetings so far. The next one will be next Wednesday, the 4th of May, between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock PM UK time, which is UTC +1. Website tells you where to go to get a conversion. I've mentioned that. The next meeting is Crystal Long doing Access charts. And it's co-chaired by Alessandro Grimaldi, who's doing a session tomorrow, I believe, and myself. And the idea is to focus as far as we can on new and lesser known features in Access, things that are, as far as possible, not widely covered at the moment. Invite a speaker for each meeting, and although it says Access Europe, that really means is it's a time that is particularly suited for people in Europe. For more details, go to there. And if you subscribe, and you can do that anywhere in the world, which somebody asked me earlier, you'll get details of future meetings, all of which are recorded and made available on YouTube. And that's where. That's it. Thank you very much.